So I wanted to do this because, well, number one, because I feel bad.
You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
All right, so kind of an interesting update in the Joe Rogan verse. There was this recent drama where Rogan and Theo did a podcast together, and people felt like Joe was kind of acting like Theo's handler, right? Theo was getting worked up about Israel, war, Epstein, the way it all kind of ties together, admittedly getting a little bit manic in his description of it, but ultimately saying things that a lot of people agree with, and Joe kind of checked him on it, tried to get him to calm down, and did this weird sort of like trickster type of routine to try to get Theo off of what he was talking about. It was just an odd moment that a lot of people noticed. Here's a quick clip to give you an idea.
But it's all the same shit has been happening forever. They haven't been helping anybody forever. They're letting fucking politicians slurp on kids. All of our fucking money goes to Israel and they're using it to fucking genocide people. It's like everybody is scared out of their wits right now. It's like our religious leaders are afraid to speak out, and it's like it's a time where it's like Satan is amongst us and our religious leaders are fucking talking about bullshit at the poll. It's just like, what is going... I don't know, man.
We gotta get you off those antidepressants, son. You're losing your fucking marbles.
You think I am?
Come hang out with us.
Since then, Rogan has brought it up, I think, a couple times, but he mentioned the other day on his podcast. I never covered this, I don't think, but here's a quick clip of that.
Theo Vaughn's going through the exact same thing. And last time he was on the podcast, he was explaining it to me. It freaks me out because I know Theo has had conversations before, like even publicly. He had a Netflix taping and it didn't go well. It was like they shelved it. They never used it. And then he goes down these spirals where he starts talking about world events and freaking out. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like, I gotta help this dude.
And as Joe explains later here, he was kind of trying to explain to this musician why he acted so strangely with Theo Von. He was explaining that like without explaining it or saying that that's what he was doing. So apparently Theo Von got upset and responded to a clip of this on Twitter saying this is cap. I don't know why people are out here saying this, but it's sad. Essentially saying that people, being Joe, are spreading narratives about him. He also did like a Facebook post about it that went a little bit more in depth. So this was kind of more direct than a lot of people would have expected, more than I would have expected, and it prompted a response from Joe. So Joe's gone out on his show yesterday and addressed that Theo Von was upset that Joe discussed his mental health on his podcast. And he addressed that by talking more about Theo Von's mental health on his podcast. So here's that.
So I wanted to do this because, well, number one, because I feel bad. And whenever I feel bad about something, and I felt bad all weekend, I feel like I have to address this. So I did an episode recently with Marcus King. You know, we were talking about people on antidepressants that can't get off of them, and I brought up Theo. And I brought up this instance where Theo he did a show for Netflix, and it apparently didn't go well. And afterwards, he said something to someone in the audience where he said, I'm just trying to not take my own life or not end my own life. I forget exactly how he said it. You know, we did a podcast a while back where we were talking about, he started talking about Israel, and I was like, I think you're just losing your mind. And a lot of people are like, you're covering for Israel. And it wasn't what I was trying to do. And it is my fault. It's clunky, and I was just trying to talk him off the ledge because I had seen this video. And you had seen that video too.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
What did you think when you saw that video?
I mean, I didn't know there's other context. Yeah,
this is the other context. You know? We should say the other context. So there was a woman that was in the crowd, apparently. Now, by the way, I've talked to Theo. I apologized to Theo. And Theo and I, we started laughing 5 minutes into the conversation. We had a long talk. But one of the things that he told me was that video, this woman had said to him that she wanted him to make a video for suicide awareness. And so he said, look, I'm just trying to not end my own life. That's a very Theo thing to say. Yeah. When you take it in that context, it's not as scary. But when you see it by itself, you're like, oh, Jesus, I got scared. I got scared, first of all, because I love Theo. And second of all, because I've known multiple people that have taken their own life that I was close to that I didn't know they were going to do it until they did it. And when they did it, you feel so fucked and so helpless. You don't know what you could have said or done differently. Since the podcast where I told him, where he started talking about Israel and people were saying I was covering for Israel, there's people that even say my wife is Jewish. She's not. I don't know why people are saying that, but I get how if you are conspiratorially minded, you would think that that's what I was doing. But if you've listened to the show, you wouldn't think that that's how I've had so many episodes where we criticize Israel. So many so that I brought in Dave Smith to argue with Douglas Murray because I didn't want Douglas Murray to be able to say these things that were promoting this war in Gaza without someone who's very educated who understands what's going on. But I get real scared when people get attached to these things and they can't get off of them. And this is the case, I think, at least in some part. I mean, Theo was on them for like 20 years. And I'd send him a bunch of these articles about these people that like lose feeling in their genitals and all these crazy side effects of getting off of these things. And so, but I was trying to just talk him off the ledge. I just did a shitty job of it. And then bringing him up with Marcus, I did a shitty job of it because I was just trying to like explain like, hey, this has happened to other people I know. It's not just you thinking about hanging yourself. It's like, this is a thing. And I didn't know any other way to do this other than to talk about it this way. You know, I didn't do a good job of it, you know, especially like the Marcus King thing. Like, that's terrible what I did. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to. You don't think sometimes when you're in the middle of a podcast, you're just having a conversation. You don't think about the impact that it's going to have. That's one of the reasons why, you know, podcasts are so weird, because like you're in the middle of trying to be entertaining, but you're also just having a conversation. And I fucked up. So because I felt so badly about it, I was like, there's got to be a way to address this where I just express myself. And so that's why. We've never done this before. We've never done this kind of a thing after a podcast. But Theo's very important to me. She's an awesome person, a great friend, and one of the most interesting and funny people I've ever met in my life. And I just felt terrible about it. And I told him I would never bring it up publicly again. But I think it is important to let people know that aspect of it. So I'm going to call him and clear this with him and make sure he's cool with me saying this, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be. And that's it. So I'm a human and I'm flawed like all of us, and I fuck up, and it's probably not the last time. It's definitely not. I'm going to fuck up again. But my intention is never to hurt anybody, ever. And that's why I very rarely, if ever, even get upset at anyone other than like corrupt politicians.
So there's a lot going on here. The most important aspect of all of this is that it comes back to the fact that Joe is developing sort of like a fundamental aversion to antidepressants and those type of medications. So this long rant, he talks about this for, 10 or 15 minutes right at the end of this podcast, says it was something that was bothering him a lot. Funny enough, he's talking to Mark Andreessen in this episode. I'm not sure if Andreessen is still sitting there this whole time because it's just Joe talking for quite a while. But Andreessen is the one that's been going around recently saying that he thinks self-reflection is like a bad trait. Like it's something that holds you back as a human. And, it's like this psychopathic tech billionaire type of mentality that they all have. And so that's something I want to get back to later about the bubble that Joe has created and how that factors into all this. But essentially, Joe's skepticism of big pharma and, medications in general is, spilling over into this thing about antidepressants and specifically his friend Theo. And so he talks most of this time about how concerned he was for his mental health, etc., and how he wasn't trying to cover for Israel or be a Peter Thiel stooge. That's essentially what people were saying about that clip, is that anytime Theo would bring up Palantir, which he's concerned about, Peter Thiel's company, and the fact that Palantir is involved in the genocide in Gaza as well as just Israel's operations in general. And Joe was skeptical about that, downplayed that, and tried to get him off that subject. So that I covered pretty much in detail on this podcast. But he's saying that wasn't his intention. He was just trying to steer Theo away from the stuff that was clearly getting him worked up. Now, the only thing about that, I think honestly that's kind of a legitimate friend thing, but Joe gets just as worked up about shit, things that are stupider, things that are more made up. That's, I think, why this caught a lot of people's attention, is that Theo's wrong about a lot of things. I don't necessarily agree with his like overall analysis on the world, but in this instance, I mean, he was expressing what I think a lot of people relate to, which is this sense of how insane it is that the people committing some of the worst type of interpersonal acts we've ever heard of, accused of some of the worst things you can be accused of, pretty credibly, and yet they are the architects of some of the like most mass scale violence any of us have seen, certainly that we've been responsible for if we're Theo Von or Joe Rogan and promoted it on our podcast. So obviously that's starting to get to him a little bit, and Joe is just like, hey man, come on, chill out, come hang out with us, you got to hang out with us, which is exactly what Theo Von shouldn't do. The last thing he should do is go and hang out with Joe in this weird right-wing bubble they've created where it's wrong and bad to take antidepressants, but it's good to inject yourself with steroids and peptides and take all these kind of like alteration drugs. And that's, I think, an interesting aspect of where this is all gone with Joe, is that, the skepticism of big pharma is paired with an overly charitable attitude towards like anything from homeopathic cures to just like insane drug injections. And some of the objections that Joe brings up when it comes to like scientific studies or drugs that are administered, etc., can be valid. In the case of Theo, and when he was talking about Theo to this other guy, the point he was making is that they no longer think that depression is caused by an imbalance in the brain, and so that means they don't even know what these drugs are doing to you that they're giving you, which is true. There was some years ago now research that came out that that's not as accurate of a picture as it could be, that it's not as simple as an imbalance or you just have less of a chemical in your brain than you're supposed to, but rather everybody has varying different levels of all these chemicals and brains that work differently, obviously. So that does make it hard to know how individual medicines or dosages might affect a particular person, which is why it can take a long time sometimes for people to get the dosages right or the balances between these different medications. But it doesn't mean that Rogan's idea of what does or doesn't constitute somebody who needs to be on medication like that is the same as a doctor's determination about the same thing. And there's this problem, it's, I'm not the first to point it out, but the gap between popular conversation and understanding of these things, popular communication about these types of things, is not done. This is, years old research that is being communicated by Rogan in a way that somehow, is supposed to dismantle the pharmaceutical industry and the use of SSRIs. So I think it's fair to be skeptical of systematic prescriptions of things, pushing pills on people. But the way Rogan talks about antidepressants is though it's the same as some kind of addictive drug or something that's like giving you a high or something that you can be hooked on. And so I think there is always that concern of how long am I supposed to be on this medicine when you get on a certain medicine. But it's just odd coming from this guy who will take substances into his own body with zero research and zero clarity about what the actual side effects of it are. And yet, when there is actual documentation and actual systematic research that goes into administering drugs like antidepressants, that's where his scrutiny lies. And so really it's this kind of libertarian mindset, right? That like the regulation is the problem more so than the idea of injecting yourself with a bunch of crazy shit. And the thing about Rogan that I've pointed out a few times, and this is as good a time as any to emphasize it about him, is that his show is just a hodgepodge of so much of this stuff. The reason his show is so popular is because it's jam-packed full of so much. I didn't watch the rest of this Andreessen video because I couldn't bear to, but I guarantee you that it's just, they're just going freewheeling on AI topics and stuff about capitalism and regulation and just everything. It's just picking and choosing from all these different subjects and turning it into just a conversation. That's how Rogan looks at it. But what he's doing is he's blasting these conversations out to millions of people. And the thing is, even though Rogan presents this show in a way that's like very chill, very casual, very kind of conversational, it's actually quite unhinged. A lot of the stuff that he pushes, the medical advice that he pushes, the ideas that he pushes, the people that he normalizes on this show, and even getting to this point of talking about his friends' mental health in a way that like they're not in the room. He's completely just giving his narrative about what he thinks about Theo Von's mental health, which turns out to like not be that accurate. But it is a part of Joe's show. He has to take these personal anecdotes and tie them into these crazy political narratives about the pharmaceutical industry and everything in order to make it entertaining and also quote unquote informative at the same time. That's his formula. It's not as casual of a form of content as it comes off as. And that's really the fundamental conceit of Joe's podcast, is that like it is jam-packed full of all of this half-truths, sometimes very true stuff, sometimes stuff that's completely false, and all of it is presented with the same level of just kind of casual persuasiveness. And when that crosses over with people who are your actual friends and you're kind of wielding that power that you have to paint a certain narrative about them, people you know in your personal life, then not only does that strain them, but it becomes a hard thing to stop doing. He says, this is the only way I knew how to talk about it. He says, I promised Theo I would never bring this up again. And then here I am bringing it up again. Then he says, I'm going to run it by Theo, make sure this is okay with him. I guess maybe he did that. Theo saying this to him happened like 2 days ago, I think, when he responded on Twitter. And the episode was out the next day. So I don't know how Joe's recording works. You know, podcasts happen very quickly, as does this one. But my point is that even in a situation like this, Joe can't stop using these personal stories as content. He can't stop pulling it in and turning it into this larger project, talking about antidepressants and suicide and how worried he is for his friend. And, you know, I think that of all the toxicity of the quote-unquote Austin comedy scene and the mothership and all these things that we hear, I do believe that he has curated a more racist environment, a more hateful environment. And even beyond that, I think this health stuff, both pushing back on the concept of public health in general, which has been Joe's project for the last several years, but also trying to create these alternatives, not even through medicines, but just through like weird treatments and injections, kind of normalizing the idea that men should be injecting themselves with stuff like all the time. And so that's their vision of health, and it's becoming this more and more closed off bubble. I think people are becoming more repulsed by it, and the health effects of not just, you know, refusing certain types of treatments or embracing others, but shaming people for going down more traditional pathways of treating themselves, trying to distance yourself from people or trying to pull people into your circle to get them off of whatever medications they may be on, which is Joe's stated goal here. And it's all in favor of this idea of like getting away from a collective society, getting away from a collectivized approach to government and moving towards this like libertarian kind of pro-billionaire approach that Rogan seems to have just by association. He has so many billionaire friends. How could he possibly be opposed to their existence in any meaningful way? And a lot of people in this podcast listening audience are noticing that Rogan's intentions are increasingly aligning not just like with billionaires, but, you know, some of the creepiest and scariest of these billionaires, people like Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel, and even people like Epstein, like wanted the type of influence that Joe has, the type of influence that he uses for other people like Peter Thiel, who he has called his friend. And, you know, for anyone who doesn't know, Thomas Massie lost his primary last night, which means that Trump was effectively able to use his political leverage to get Massie out of Congress. He's not out of Congress right away. He's got a few more months, but they beat him. So he's not coming back for another term, which is exactly the way Trump has handled anyone who has ever crossed him in the past. So what that means is that there is no room in this movement for dissent from Trump and what Trump is doing. There is none. And Rogan has aligned himself with Trump pretty closely. He's willing to lightly criticize him here and there, but overall, he's fully aligned with the Trump project. And the reason, he won't really say it, but the reason is because Trump takes a wrecking ball to like the regulatory system and anything that these drugs would actually go through and do go through in order to make sure they're safe. The same regulatory system that now Ibogaine is going through, just beginning the processes of doing that, which he takes as a major win. And that's exactly what should happen to Ibogaine. It should be studied relentlessly and regulated by the government. That's correct. That's exactly the same thing that has happened with these different SSRIs, different drugs that do help people, and in some cases not, but the only way that we know that is if they're rigorously researched by real scientists, not charlatans like Joe Rogan or the people that he likes to have on his podcast. And ultimately, the crises that these guys create is going to be solved by real scientists. They're going to be the ones that everybody turns to when we have a crazy measles outbreak or the type of climate disasters that people have been predicting for decades. Those things will eventually come to a head. And I think the scientific approach to solving those problems also needs to come with an ideology, a public health ideology, a collective health ideology. That's the only way to break the spell of this like demonic libertarianism that Joe Rogan and his friends are participating in, is to remind everybody that we need to have a collective approach to society. And that prevents people from feeling so alienated when they're in a bad way, and makes it so that the support systems that exist are not so insular and risky.